Hello, my name is Kara, and I just want to talk about books. This is my first video that I've made for YouTube, so I could be talking into the void for all I know. I probably am, but I just like talking about books, so I'm happy. I want to share my favorite books of 2017, because this was a really good reading year for me. This was actually the first year I signed up for Goodreads finally, so I started tracking what I was reading because I kept running into the problem of signing out a book from the library and realizing that after a chapter or so in, I've read this before, maybe 5 years ago or so. So I thought I could get ahead of that problem by actually keeping track of what I'm reading. So I read a total of 90 books this year, which I'm pretty happy with. I got kind of obsessed with the reading challenge option presented by Goodreads, which I didn't really know was a thing, that people challenged themselves to read so many books in a year, but I got competitive with it. I don't know who I was competing against, but I got really competitive and I started reading like a book a day for a while there. It got dark, but it was a good kind of dark. So, since it was 2017, I thought I would list my 17 top books of what I read this year. So I'll go through my books by genre. This is in no particular order, just big list of my top 17 books of 2017. Starting with short story collections. So one of the short story collections that I really enjoyed this year was China Miéville's 3 Moments of an Explosion, which he's one of my favorite authors. He's a science fiction, speculative, new weird, I think it's called now. And it was just brilliant. It was just every story. They're just an entire world encapsulated in one short piece of fiction. They are utterly unique. I don't know, it gives me such feelings of just such joy that this kind of weirdness is being published and enjoyed by other people too. I think everyone should be reading China Miéville's work. Anyone who likes science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, anything in that world. His work can be a bit dense sometimes, but once you get into the language of it, you're just drawn into an entire world. Like no other author. Another short story collection that I really loved this year was The Wilds by Julia Elliott. And this is a very southern gothic take on sci-fi fantasy, and they're just utterly weird as well, but so satisfying, these short little stories. It's kind of this dark, gritty exploration of the wilderness, both inside us and out. Moving into nonfiction, I really tried to branch out this year and read more nonfiction. Typically, I'm a straight fiction reader. Just give me a novel, give me narrative, and I'm happy. I'm set to go. But I really wanted to read some things different this year. I was really pleasantly surprised by how I was drawn into these nonfiction books this year. I think I found some real gems, and I was just thrilled to be learning about these things that I never would have thought of to learn about, to research before. So these were a wonderful experience. One of them was The Wave by Susan Casey, and it's literally a book about waves, water in the ocean. I mean, I would never think to care about that. It turns out that the laws of physics, as we have understood them in the past, don't quite explain how water moves, which blew my mind. But these rogue and freak waves in the ocean that are over 100 feet tall, physics can't explain how they happen. So researchers have to use quantum physics to explain how these waves are being formed. It was just a fascinating read. Another nonfiction book I really loved this year was The Witches, Salem 1692 by Stacy Schiff. And this was a long one, that's for sure. But it was just such a detailed accounting of what happened that year in Salem when the witch trials were at their height. I guess I'd kind of known the more pop culture history of the Salem witch trials, but hearing this really detailed accounting of what happened to each of these women and people in the town and what kind of brought about all these tensions, it was kind of a terrifying experience how this frenzy ended up costing the lives of so many people. Another nonfiction that I really loved this year was The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. I love her. I love Neil Gaiman. So them as a couple just make me happy. Everything they do, her music, his books. And so I hadn't thought to read a lot of memoirs before, and it's never really been drawn to reading memoir. But her book, I just picked it up and thought, it might be a good genre for me. I might be really happy learning more about these people that I find very interesting. And I'm so glad I picked this book up. Her life is so interesting. And really, she's made her life interesting. And it was so inspirational. Another nonfiction book I really liked this year was Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love. So it's in that same kind of self-discovery vein. And it was a quick read. It was a really good way to start off my year last year. And I am considering rereading it again this year to kind of start off on that same good note. It's very feel-good. It's a very feel-good read. My last nonfiction book is At Home by Bill Bryson. This was a really interesting exploration of how our homes have been shaped. The physical places we live have been shaped by kind of social and cultural practices over the years, over generations. So this was a really interesting kind of step back to take a look at things that I've taken for granted and find out why they are the way they are. So moving into fiction, this is what I read the most of this year, and I found some gems this year. I was really happy with a lot of the books I read this year. Starting with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't think I actually have read this before. I thought I had read it when I was a kid, but I don't think I'd ever read it all the way through. And it's just this short little book. And I'm reading the rest of the books in the series now because I fell in love with it. And it's just utterly hilarious. Just utterly hilarious. I can't recommend it highly enough that everyone should read this book. Another really funny book I read this year was called The Mark and the Void by Paul Murray. And this book is about an investment banker in Dublin and how he kind of gets involved with this Irish con man trying to rob his bank. And I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook was fantastic. The narrator does such good accents for all these different characters. The main character, the investment banker, he's French. The con man, he's Irish. All his co-workers are from different parts of the world, Australian, German. It's just this hilarious group of idiots. And the relationships are... everything goes so wrong for everybody. And it just... it was so good. It was so good. And continuing in a similar vein with more funny books was All Our Wrong Todays by Elan Mastai. This is a book about time travel, and it's about this character who is from a different future, who really messes things up. And I wish I had the book here. I listened to it on audiobook, so I'll paraphrase. But one entire chapter in the book is just... listening to that in audio was so funny. Oh my god. And it was completely appropriate, too, for what this character did. Just completely appropriate. And one of the books that I think will make maybe one of my favorite books of all time is called A Piece of the World by Christina Baker Klein. This book is about the American painter Andrew Wyeth, who very famous painter, and the book is based on a painting of his called Christina's World. And so the main character, Christina, the woman pictured in this painting, this is her story about her life growing up in this small town in Maine. It's a very character-driven book. She has an undiagnosed disability that gets worse and worse as she ages. It's a really beautiful exploration of this woman's life and her relationship with her family and with this place that she lives. The house that she lives in is really a character of its own in this novel, and it was just stunning. The writing, I can't say enough about it. It was an absolutely beautiful book. One of the stranger books I read this year was called 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis, and it's literally about 15 dogs. These two Greek gods get together and give these dogs human intelligence, and they make a bet whether they're happier having this intelligence or not. And so it just follows all these dogs through their lives and whether they end up happy or not. And just like reading the pack dynamics of these dogs with human intelligence, like they still like to sniff each other's butts, but they question why. And a really short novel I read this year that I really loved is Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. And it's very short. I listened to it on audio, and I listened to books on like double speed, so it only took about an hour. It was just a quick, but really engaging, and listening to it all in one go was probably the best thing I did. It really takes you to a place that is very uncomfortable and strange, and it just leaves you, I don't know, left me a bit breathless. So it follows the point of view of a woman who wakes up in a hospital bed not knowing why she's there, and this boy who's there with her, and he's trying to get her to go through her story to try and piece together what brought her to this point. And she has a young daughter, so she's concerned about where her daughter is. And you're brought along trying to piece all this together in this very disturbing chain of events. Another book that I really loved this year was Anderson by Michael Boyce. And this was a book I picked up in the thrift store, I think for like 99 cents. It's really a random purchase. I just liked the cover. And it turns out it's about a guy who investigates paranormal phenomena. And every bit of that is right up my alley. It's just a lot of my favorite things all rolled into one lucky purchase from a thrift store. So this is gotta be one of my top for the year. My only YA favorite of the year is The Naming by Alison Croghan. And this is a book I had read before. As a kid, I remember picking this book up from the library and reading it and loving it as a kid. This was all I read, these kind of high fantasy stories. But when I read it as a kid, none of the other books in the series were out. So I ended up kind of forgetting about it for a long time. I was pretty disappointed that I had nothing more to read from this world. But I remembered it. So more than a decade later, I thought about it again and wondered, maybe the other books are out? And I found out there are 4 books in the series now. So I read them all in, I think, a week. And, oh my god, it stands up. It stood up the test of time from when I was a kid to reading it now in my 20s. It was just this will be one of my favorite YA fantasy series of all time. I don't have many that I really love in these kind of fantasy series, but this will be one I revisit. I'm sure. It's one of the most unique fantasy series I think I've ever read. Even given the fact that it does follow along the trope of the chosen one. The main character is kind of the chosen one of this land who has to save everything. Her journey getting there is an adventure and a half. So winding down now, second to last on my list is Zoo City by Lauren Bucas, a South African writer, and this is a fantasy speculative fiction novel set in South Africa, and the premise is that when people have committed a crime, their guilt kind of physically manifests as this animal companion. So the main character, something happened in her past that slowly gets revealed. That means she has a kind of a sloth. But since having an animal only happens to those people who've committed crimes, it's hugely stigmatized. And when they get these animals, they also get magic powers. So our main character, she has an ability to find lost things. So she gets embroiled in this series of events that brings her deeper and deeper into this criminal underground in Johannesburg. And the premise is so unique, and it was really well written. And I'm definitely going to read more of Lauren Bukes' work in the future. So the last book I'm going to talk about of my top books of 2017 is The Ghost Bride by Yangtze Chu. So this book is set in historic China. I can't remember exactly when it was set, but a few hundred years ago, I'm pretty sure. So the main character's family is part of the upper classes in society, but they're kind of on the downslope. So she is offered a ghost marriage, which is essentially to symbolically marry the dead son of a more prominent family. This would be done to prevent his spirit from becoming a restless or hungry ghost. And so things start to get kind of messy when she realizes she's being haunted by this boy, and she has to leave her body behind, adventure into the spirit world to save her own life, essentially. So you get introduced to all these different characters from Chinese mythology and all these interesting cultural practices. And I really hope there's a sequel to this book. So those were my top books of 2017. I hope you all go and read them and enjoy them as much as I did. I'm gonna go get back to reading now. Bye.